Okay, you cited freedom of speech in that. Why should your right to freedom of speech trump a trans person's right not to be offended?
Because in order to be able to think, you have to risk being offensive. I mean, look at the conversation we're having right now. You know, like, you're certainly willing to risk offending me in the pursuit of truth. Why should you have the right to do that? It's been rather uncomfortable.
Well, I'm very glad I put you on the spot.
Well,
I'm very glad that I have exercised my freedom of speech.
You get my point. It's like you're doing what you should do, which is digging a bit to see what the hell's going on. So and that is what you should do. But you're exercising your freedom of speech to certainly risk offending me. And that's fine. I think more power to you as far as I'm concerned. I didn't say that women shouldn't be striving for the top or anything like that, because I don't believe that for a second.
Striving for the top, but you're going to put all those hurdles in their way, as has been in their way for centuries, and that's fine. You're saying that's fine.
No, I really
the
think
patriarchal system
really
is just
that's
fine.
Silly. I do. I think that's silly. I really do. I mean, look at your situation. You're hardly unsuccessful.
Yeah, and I have
How do you
quite
manage?
hard to get where I've got to.
I see that in resentful men all the time. They're very antipathetic towards women, and they blame their misery and resentment on the fact that women won't have anything to do with them, while the women are making them self-conscious for not being all they should be. Because the women think, why should I bother with you if you're not the embodiment of the spirit that will move into the unknown and face the Leviathan? First of all, some losers lose all the time, which is the side you occupy, say, is that no one invites you out. All the women are rejecting you. Who's got the problem? It's not all the women. Well, the thing is, like most things, it's complicated. You know, so yeah, all the women are rejecting you. Why should I bother with you if you're not the embodiment of the spirit that will move into the unknown and face the Leviathan, which is... Why should I bother with you if you're not the embodiment of the spirit that will move into the unknown and face the Leviathan, which is... I realized a while back that I had gone through a process when I was in my 20s that was akin to something Descartes did. I'm not trying to compare myself to Descartes, but he was trying to look for something that he couldn't doubt, and the consequence of his search was, I think, therefore I am. Which I don't think is exactly a good translation of what Descartes meant. I think he meant something more like, I can't dispute the reality of my own consciousness, something like that. And that's good. That isn't where I got to in my contemplations. I was looking for something that I regarded as incontrovertible. And I was fortunate at that time because I was reading Alexander Solzhenitsyn, and Solzhenitsyn wrote the Gulag Archipelago, among many other things. And the Gulag Archipelago is a description of the absolute catastrophes of the Soviet state. And the entanglement of the individual psyches of the Soviet citizens in that catastrophe, their descent into deceit and cruelty, deceit, resentment, and cruelty. And Solzhenitsyn said in the Gulag Archipelago that he thought the Nuremberg trials were the most important event of the 20th century. And the reason he said that was because the Nuremberg judgment, for better or worse, was that there were some acts that were so viciously brutal that there was no excuse whatsoever for engaging in them, no matter who you were or what your culture was or what your rationale was. And so for Solzhenitsyn, the Nuremberg trials established what you might describe as the transcendent reality of evil. And that's an unbelievably useful thing. It's akin to this idea of suffering, in my estimation, because, well, it's the child in Auschwitz problem. It's that you need an answer to the problem posed by the suffering of innocence as a consequence of malevolence. You say that's evil, the conscious exaggeration of unnecessary suffering. That gives you a vantage point. That's wrong. Whatever it is, that's wrong. Well, then you have a place to stand. You can say, oh, okay, now I know that there's something that's wrong. In a non-trivial way. In a way that can't be just dispensed with rational objections that emerge as a consequence of contemplation of the boundedness of life. Those answers aren't serious enough to address the issue. Well, so I thought, okay, well, I found something that I can grip onto or stand on without dispute. There are acts that are unquestionably evil. And that means that there are acts that are unquestionably good. Now, it doesn't mean that we know what they are, right? Because just because you know one pole of something doesn't necessarily mean you know the other. I could say that whatever leads us as far away as we can possibly get from Auschwitz, that's good. Say, well, you can't deny that pain is real and suffering is real, and you can't deny that suffering induced by malevolence is the worst of all possible sufferings. Those are all undeniable as far as I'm concerned. Those are all meanings of life. And they're real enough so that if you encounter them, like if you encounter true malevolence, the probability that you'll walk away from it unscathed is very, very low. It will damage you psychophysiologically, and you might never recover. And that's real enough for me. Well, is the path away from that real? Is the path that transcends that real? Maybe it's more real. That's what I've come to believe, as pessimistic as I am about the nature of humanity, myself included. As real as I believe suffering and evil to be, it appears to me that the mode of being that leads you away from that that enables you to bear the suffering with nobility and to be useful to others who are in pain, and to constrain the malevolence in your own heart and around you, that mode of being is more powerful than that which it is set against. And not only that, I think that we experience this. I think we experience it. We just don't notice. Maybe because we're too busy thinking. Because noticing and thinking aren't the same thing. We see in our own lives when we're engaged in something deeply meaningful. Music is the best pathway to that, I think. It's the most rapid and indisputable pathway to that. Virtually everyone loves music, and music speaks of meaning. It does it directly. It shows you what life would be like if it was ordered and harmonious, and you were dancing along with it properly. It gives you an intimation of psychological integrity. But you watch your lives, day to day, week to week, month to month, you'll notice that there are times when you're so deeply engaged in what you're doing, when what you're doing is so meaningful, in the kind of meaning that announces itself, not the kind that you're creating, that life is so meaningful, you think, this is worth the suffering. I had a dream once, and I'm speaking psychologically here, not theologically. I had a dream once. I was in the cemetery of an old church, an old cathedral, surrounded by the graves, and there were indentations in the grounds where all the graves were, and all of a sudden the graves started to open, and it was a graveyard where great men of the past had been buried, and so the grave opened and an armed king stood up, and then another grave opened and another armed king stood up, and this happened all around me, and these were very formidable figures, right? They were the great heroes of the past, and after a number of them appeared on the scene, they looked around and saw each other, and being warrior types, they immediately started to fight. And the question is, what stops the great kings of the past from fighting? And I had a revelation after the dream. I can't remember if it was part of it, but Yes, it was part of the dream. They all bowed down to the figure of Christ. And then I woke up and I thought, what in the world does that possibly mean? And then I understood it. I understood that if you have 20 kings, let's say, and you took the thing that was most king-like about each of them, and then you combined it into a single figure, then you get a single figure of transcendent heroism, of transcendent good. And it's a tenet of the Jungian school of psychology, let's say, that figure of transcendent good is symbolized by the image of Christ. And the purpose of that image is so that even the tyrannical king has someone to bend his knee to. Fundamental existential problem of life. We all suffer. That's the meaning of life. We all suffer. The suffering is exacerbated by the malevolence in our hearts and the malevolence in the hearts of all of us. And the paramount issue that faces us is what to do about that. And the answer is, I think, live a life that manifests itself as meaningful. So here was the question. What does a being who's omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent lack? So those are the three classical attributes of God. And the answer was limitation. And that was the reason for the creation of man. That there's something about limitation that the absolute lacks. Say, well, being requires limitation, let's say, because if you can be anything at all at any moment, then you're everything at once, and in some sense you're nothing at all. We're in this situation. Our being is defined by our limitations, and that produces suffering. The question is whether there's a mode of being that justifies the suffering. That's the fundamental religious question. And I think that the answer to that is yes. That recognition manifests itself in admiration. People are very imitative. It's one of the things that characterizes us in contradistinction to animals who are not very imitative. It's probably the precondition for our linguistic capacity. One of the things that characterizes human existence is the capacity to spontaneously pick a model for emulation, right? A model for admiration, and that's the manifestation of that moral instinct to say, well, to admire is to want to copy. You say, well, what do you want to copy? Well, you want to copy that which is most admirable. What is most admirable? Well, what is most admirable? That starts to become a transcendent question. Right? You can imagine that the local examples of what's admirable, they're right in front of you, and they're concrete and tangible. But to abstract out from that which is admirable in and of itself is simultaneously to construct something like the representation of a transcendent good. bloody love bread pudding with caramel and ice cream, which is quite delicious. Put salt on it and throw it in the dehydrator, so that works pretty well. Yeah. Cook that up, cut it into small pieces and fry it up till it's crispy. It's like, and I carry beef jerky with me, which we make. I'm going to add mushrooms next because maybe I could eat them. Yep. So, part of the reason that I wrote this book, and it's a brilliant book, arguably the greatest work of nonfiction of the 20th century. Yeah, it's in the top 10 anyways. This is 12, excuse me. This is from 12 Rules for Life. Rule 4 is compare yourself to who someone else is today. So imagine that that's not so good. Why not? Really, do we need an explanation for that? Well, what do you mean by that? First of all, poorly written at best and showed a very poor grasp of life. Second of all, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. What makes you think you just don't hate the successful? The problem is that it's envy.